Of mortal or immortal race, from the same Mother Earth we trace our lives, but not the same degree of power and vital energy. To man of transient space is given, as in the brazen soil of heaven, yet some resemblance can we find of nature or the mighty mind that links us to the power divine. However, 'tis not in us to know when shall stern fate's recorded blow by day or night our course define.
This episode is dedicated to the brave men and women defending liberty everywhere. To the free people of Ukraine, glory in liberty. To the tyrants, only the grave.
Let tyrants shake their iron rod, and slavery clank her galling chain. We fear them not, we trust in God. New England's God forever reigns.
Hi, this is Joseph. I'm here with Isaac. Hi, Isaac.
Hi Joseph, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here in the studio, in Studio B. Thanks as well for our listeners clocking in to our so far audio show. And this is episode 6 of it. For an audio show, we do rely a lot on visual aids. So we appreciate if you saw our thumbnail today that demonstrates what our show will be all about. Well, let me just give you the title though first. Agony and Agora, how the Greeks prove they are better than you. If that didn't get your attention, nothing will. The Greeks are the best. Now, what is our art for today, and why is that important, and how can we launch our conversation based on this? Tell us about it, Isaac.
Well, I want you to think about this scene. It's Olympia, the greatest holy site in all of ancient Greece. And in the arena, in front of thousands of visitors and spectators from all over Greece, there are two men. They are naked. They are covered only in olive oil. They are wearing leather gloves. Well, gloves is a very generous description. It's more like leather stripes, which they
Like wrappings.
which they wrapped. Which they wrapped around their hands to not so much to soften the blows that they land on the rivals, but to soften the damage to the bone structures and knuckles. And they fight and they punch each other in every possible place. It doesn't matter where. And the goal, finally, one of them, covered with blood and exhausted, stumbles and falls to the ground. Then something amazing happened. A woman clad in a chiton, which is the classic Greek garment, and crowned with the tiara of victory, and winged, comes down from the heavens and crowns the victor, who is, as a matter of fact, a head taller than the goddess. That's what our piece of art for today is describing. It's a vase, a Greek vase, an Athenian black figure vase, depicting Nike, the goddess of victory, crowns the winner of a boxing match. And this is the prize for, it's not an Olympic prize, it's a prize for the Panathenaic Games. And it was created around 363 to 362 BC. So it's a relatively late piece, but it still conveys the basic idea that distinguished Greeks from all the world. And this idea was not freedom, not democracy, because again, the Greeks hold extensive amounts of slaves, and Greek people are enslaved inside of Greece. And democracy is actually a very peculiar form of government, which is not common, at least not the beginning of the classical era. and it becomes less and less common as much as the more we advance. But the basic idea is agon. Agon, which is the base for the modern English word agony, means competition, strife. Odysseus, for example, is described by Homer as agonistos, a striver. And here's another peculiar thing about this piece. We mentioned that the boxer is a head taller on the piece than the goddess. This is significant. In Near Eastern figures, the way you convey that one figure represents a god and one figure represents a man is that the man who usually gives something to the gods is smaller and less clearly drawn than the god. But on this piece, the boxer is just as tall and just as beautifully drawn as Nike and Zeus, which are crowning him and hailing him, not the other way around.
Zeus is the figure on the side with the hand extended?
Yes, he's saluting the victor. The victor, on the other hand, is holding the marks of victory, his leather stripes that he's unfolding after the fight.
And what is the significance of the fighter being well drawn and not shrunk?
It means that while the gods are more excellent, remember this word, excellent, then the boxer, by virtue of being gods, still the excellence of the boxer, the victor, the human victor, and the gods is comparable, because just as the gods are excellent because they're simply better, and this is an observable fact, if you could see Zeus, you would agree that he's better than anything else, then in the same manner, this boxer is better than the other boxer. As a matter of fact, he's better than all the other human boxers participating in the games this day.
Therefore, we have a merit-based games, a level playing field.
Yes.
Metaphorically and literally, and he demonstrated that he is better in this or that.
And it was observed by all the spectators and the referees and the judges that came from all over the Athenian dominions to participate and see what is the best of the best that Athens can produce.
So you're making an interesting philosophical point. And although we mostly talk history in the podcast, we use that as a catalyst to discuss the philosophy of history, which is why our show is called The Iron Rod, because we're discussing, for example, in the Iron Rod case, tyranny as seen through tires throughout history. So we discuss, in this case, the history of Greece and Athens and so on, and we try to understand certain, thinking ideas that we could kind of glean from it. And you're making the point that the significant idea in this early time in Greece is not freedom and not other things, which you kind of poo-pooed, but this competition or this merit-based system. Are you in fact saying that?
I'm in fact saying that because before we can say what men ought to be, we must say what men is. The Akkadian peoples, the Mesopotamian and Egyptian peoples said man is significantly lesser than the gods, therefore he must live and die in the service of the gods and their representatives on earth. The Greeks said, no, man might be lesser than the gods by virtue of being a man and not a god, but man is also somewhat comparable to the gods, because just as the gods have excellence and merit, so does man have excellence and merit. And the excellence and merit of the gods and of gods and men are both observable from the outside. Therefore, they could say men should be free. And even critics of the idea that men should be free, those who said not all men should be free, they would say, because those men, they would say excellent men should be free.
That's very fascinating. That does remind me of Plato, but we'll perhaps get to that later in this episode or in a different episode. We talk about Plato's golden men and silver men and so on. But this is an amazing idea, and let's dwell on this a bit longer. So although it is, possible that, some man in Acadia or in Egypt, or even a cave dweller or a hunter-gatherer had some of these ideas or even spoke about it with his pals around the bonfire. But no, correct me if I'm wrong, no one really wrote it down and lived it and embodied it in the history of the world until the Greeks came about. So they're the first ones to put this into action.
Absolutely. And that's because men have a perverse nature by which we cannot admit that other people are better than us. We always find the excuses. Oh, this guy can run faster than me. So what? I can lift things heavier than he can. This man is smarter than me. No, he's not actually smarter than me. He is more book smart, but I am more street smart. I'm sorry I have to bring this up, but yes, this street smart is not a thing. Is not a worthy category.
Yes, but don't look at me so strongly, Isaac, when you say
I'm
that.
not looking. No. I'm not looking at you. I'm not looking at you.
Inside studio joke here.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a fascinating idea. So, and I think you're saying that this is perhaps a precondition for coming up with the idea of freedom as well.
Yes, absolutely. Because if man has merit, an independent merit, individual merit, men should not live in service to other men or to something or to anything else. You can say that they should serve other men or the gods or some abstract idea or the state, but you cannot say that the goal of human existence is to provide nourishment to the gods, because human life is so much, because if so, why is human life so much more beautiful and perfect and variable?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And that's perhaps, if this was the only thing they accomplished, it would be enough to justify the title of our episode. This is episode 6 of the Iron Rod podcast, if you're just tuning in now. And the title is How the Greeks Prove They Are Better Than You. Because this is, in fact, is such a wonderful idea. And, the Greek civilization, as we're describing it, begins around 2,800, 2,900 years ago. But we're talking as late as 350 or 2,400 BC.
In a way, what we have, the West, as we all know and love it, is a product of Greece. Because, think about the SATs. What is the goal of the SATs? To see which high school students are the best and deserve to get assistance and acceptance into the best schools. Now, we didn't devise yet an effective way to measure which schools are the best, and college rankings are bullshit. Excuse my French, but the SATs are not for example, at least based on the idea that certain students are better than others. Of course, there are ideas. Of course, therefore they deserve more things than other students. Now, of course, I know all the tricks around. I know private tutoring and cramming and all this. It doesn't. But the basic idea is a very Greek idea. It's not unlike the Chinese idea, in which government positions were handed out to those who having the best marks in the government exams. But that's a different ethic. That was a matter of not finding the Mandarins. This was not based on the idea that the Mandarins are the best in society. It was based that they are the best for government service. But that's besides the point. We can deal with ancient China later, Imperial China later.
It is amazing that we managed to sneak in ancient China 2 weeks in a row. So hopefully we're not making a habit of this. Although China is always in our minds.
It's the other great civilization.
Yes, but it is not ours. And I think people
it might be
almost gloss over this, that if you live in the West today, or even if you live anywhere in the world, you are really inheriting this Western tradition and civilization.
Even if you live
starts with Greece.
Even if you live in Eastern Asia, Eastern Asia is an incredibly Greek place nowadays.
Yeah, no question. So, let us then describe this ancient Greece in other ways. What else did the Greeks perhaps invent that you think our audience should know just from the get-go? Do you have some different ideas? For example, the Greeks invented democracy.
Well, define democracy.
Well, so, in Athens, for example, and, Socrates used to make fun of this, that they took it to the extreme, to the point that they're not appointing their generals based on merit and how to fight, but rather based on some democratic notion.
Yes.
But the idea that everybody gets into a room and votes.
Yes.
Or the substantial people go into a room and votes.
Yes.
This is not found anywhere else in the world.
Well, as we will see in the Germanic and Judaic episodes, which are forthcoming, it's not accurate. I wish it was, but it's not accurate. The idea of government by vote is really, really not unique to ancient Greece and not original to them. But we can see it in various other forms of government. But I agree with you, but that in Greece it's have a different flavor. Because in Greece, the idea, all voting, I would say that the Greeks invented politics as we know it. Politics as a kind of striving, as a striving enterprise. As politicians getting into the arena, presenting their ideas and themselves, and competing over who is best at convincing the citizenry that their ideas are, that either they are the best politicians, the best statesmen, and therefore should be relied upon, or that their ideas are the best ideas and therefore should be acted upon.
That's fascinating, and I think you alluded to this. Along with starting modern politics, they started all the foibles and all the inanities associated thereof.
Oh, absolutely! Because one way to do it is, of course, by telling everyone how good you are and how good your ideas are. But another way is simply starting to slander your opponent,
or bribing the population.
Of course,
even I think the object of fascination, and one of the great men who is in some ways a poster child for Athens and therefore for Greece. Pericles was not beyond entertaining the population, bribing them, stealing money from the rich or from the priests, for example, the oracle's money, and just seizing it and bringing it to Athens and so on and so forth.
That's an interesting thing. Pericles would not see it, at least I want to describe it in such ugly words. He would say, I am the best citizen around because I give the best shows around. That's part of... I am very, very aware of my civic duties as a rich and an honorable Athenian aristocrat, and I use my power, influence, and riches to honor the city and the gods by putting on the best plays and the best shows and giving out the best feasts. He won't use such ugly words as bribing. That's something the Romans would do, because the Romans invented something else very important, which is what should I say it? Frankness, I would say. The Romans were not politically correct people. They did not mince words. But the Romans are not the topic of today.
Yes, and the Greeks were, and it's interesting how many of the issues and many of the phenomena that ancient Greece as a city-state, dealing with, for example, loyalty and treason, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, still exist today. So everyone saw the news, for example, and although we discuss history in our show, we're not blind to the realities of the current war. There has been an invasion of the sovereign state of Ukraine by the military of Russia, and our show and this episode is dedicated for the stalwart defenders of Ukraine fighting the Russian hordes. And this sort of thing would have been very recognizable to the Athenians. The fact that Zelensky decided to ban the parties that are kind of treasonous and that they're favorably disposed towards Russia. He did this, I believe, yesterday or today.
Yeah, all the political parties that outright said that Ukraine should be part of the Russian Federation, or at least a client state of Russia, essentially banned, or at least deprived of faction status, which has various meaning.
And a lot of, kind of our effete Westerners were a little bit scandalized by this. And I only bring this by way of reference.
By the way, it doesn't mean that that Zelensky's secret police are going door to door arresting or party members.
But maybe they should.
No,
every one of the head of one of the parties he, for example, prescribed, that guy's daughter was a goddaughter from Vladimir Putin. Yeah. So these people are many of them are traitors to the sovereign state.
Well,
but the point is that past is present and the future, and that there's very few new political phenomena in general. Mm-hmm. And the things that we see today, we saw in ancient Greece, and this is why it's so important and instructive for us to look at ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And one of the things is that all these shiny baubles that Athens and Greece generally had, and all the amazing ideas and accomplishments on a civilizational level that they managed to attain was only being protected by military might.
Yes.
And, for example, one of the shocking statistics that I always saw floating around that is always worth mentioning and should be mentioned again in the future is that during some of the Persian invasions of Greece, which is a very significant geopolitical events, up to 90% of the city-states in Greece were neutral or sided with the Persians,
including one of the most ancient and honored ones, which was Thebes, which Athens always regarded as some sort of an elder state to itself, because Thebes and Athens are one of the two autochtonic state, which means we discussed in the previous episode the Bronze Age collapse and how the Mycenaean civilization collapsed. So, out of all the old Mycenaean settlements, Thebes and Athens were some of the most significant ones that were not overrun by invaders, that actually remained in place. So, Athens had a tremendous amount of respect for Thebes. That's actually reflected in the fact that much of the Athenian drama takes place in Thebes or in ancient Thebes, and for example, the Oedipus trilogy, and so
we'll
on.
have to get to Oedipus.
And Thebes, or at least aristocratic Thebes, largely sided with the Persians. And one of the greatest poets of ancient Greeks, Pindaros or Pindar, actually was among the young people who did not want to side with the Persians and fled to the Athenian-dominated city of Agina in the Bay of Salamis. And
fascinating. So just to give, are we able to do this on this next segment? Just to give our audience a introduction to the warfare that was necessary. We have a trailer, and I'm hoping to try to play it and the opening to the next segment. We have a trailer from the movie. Now, this is the 300 Sparta movie, 1962. So this is not the famous 300 Spartan movie from 2010, I believe. Mm-hmm. This is the older one, but I thought it was very interesting. And if all goes well, we will try to play it. We will try to insert it into the show notes. I don't think we could do it right now, Isaac.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's important to remember something else. Let's tie this segment again to Agon. All Greek interstate politics, what we might call international, even though it's kind of a weird word to use in terms of ancient Greece, all the internal competition within Greece between the various city-states is also an agon. It's striving to find out which city is the best and should be the hegemon of all the others. And when the Thebians sided with the Persians, all the Greeks were terribly disappointed, because the Thebians clearly were not as excellent as they thought, because they submitted to the Persian. And we will discuss more on that topic next segment.
And now we'll play the trailer in a moment.
Stay. And here we stand. For how long? Until we win. Or die.
Of all the ancient sagas of heroes and gods, none has echoed stronger than the true and mighty legend of Leonidas, the king called Lion, and his faithful 300, who fought to save a civilization and the world at a place called Thermopylae, starring Richard Eakin as Leonidas the Lion, Sir Ralph Richardson as Themistocles the politician.
And the corn and Clinton too, with Prescott and Cornwall is joined, together plot our overthrow, in one infernal league combined.
And we're doing the next segment of our episode on ancient Greece. This is episode 6, and we're in our mini-series on the roots of liberty. We're talking about the roots of liberty that we see in ancient Greece. You just heard a movie trailer, old movie trailer. This is 1962, the 300 Spartans, and you heard about the Spartans holding off the hordes of Persian troops at the Battle of Thermopylae. To give a perspective, Thermopylae is 480 BC. That's around 100 years before the painting that we discussed in the first segment. Make sure to either see that painting in the show notes or to Google it. The Goddess of Victory crowning the boxing match, so you understand what we were talking about in the first segment of our episode. And right now you heard the trailer where they talked about the Spartans holding off the Persian hordes, and which actually leads us to one of the quotes that we prepared. The most significant part about this battle was that the Greeks, aka the Spartans, were massively outnumbered. There was maybe 300 Spartans and some other Greeks who accompanied them, and there are millions of Persians, maybe hundreds of thousands.
Nobody actually knows.
Maybe 2 million, according to Herodotus. There's a lot. And the Spartans ultimately didn't win. So Euripides' line about 10 soldiers wisely led will beat 100 without a head didn't exactly apply, because they didn't have 10-to-1 odds. It was much more severe than that. And speaking about a subject that we brought up in the first segment, treason to the polity and to Greece in general, the Persians were allowed in to the backside and defeated the Spartans by a Greek and Spartan trader who allowed them to bypass the very narrow defenses that the Spartans had set up, and that utterly defeated them. As a result, all 300 Spartans, with one exception, were defeated. We'll speak about the Spartans again, but perhaps you could give us a more basic understanding. We spoke about Sparta as being one place. We spoke before about Athens. Our audience might get the distinct impression that Greece is not a homogeneous empire the way we spoke about ancient Egypt, the Bronze Age civilization, or the other Bronze Age civilizations in Mesopotamia. So tell us, what sort of civilization, what sort of political entity are we seeing in Greece?
Well, the most important institution in Greece is the polis. Now, the polis is something combining a nation, a tribe, a city, and a state. Now, what does that mean? It means that this, first of all, let's think about Athens. The name of Athens in Greek, it's not Athens. It's not the name of a place. It's Athenai, the Athenians. So basically, you have a city that's not named. This is the place called Athens. Therefore, everybody who lives here are Athenians. No, we are the Athenians, and that's the name of our city. This is the city of the Athenians. So this idea of group identity, which is total. You are an Athenian. It means you are wholly Athenian. Of course, you're also a Greek. You're also other thing. You're also an Ionian or an Aeolian, if in an early iteration of this tribal identity. But it means you are many things. But politically and religiously and in many other things, you are an Athenian. And if, let's say, the Athenians would have to pack everything up and go on ships and go to some distant shore and build their lives again anew, they are not building a new state. It's the same state, it just changed location. As a matter of fact, during the Persian invasion, they thought about doing just that. The Persians famously captured the city of Athens, which was left empty, apart from some defenders, because all the Athenian citizenry went on their ships, the wooden walls as they call them, and fled to the Bay of Salamis. And they thought that if they won't manage to regain their homeland, they'll just go somewhere else and settle there.
So this is fascinating that, nations are generally speaking described in two fashions, which are connected, but have, an interesting connection based on the situation, that is blood and soil.
Mm-hmm.
Blood being the tribe, the racial element that connects all the different members of a giant clan. It's bigger than a clan. A clan would just be a giant family, and this is like a super clan. And the soil is the actual dirt under your ground that your ancestors...
Geography. We all living within this the boundaries of this geographical unit. Therefore, we are all belong to whatever state control these geographical units.
And some people could survive a long time as a distinct people without having the soil underneath them,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the Kurds or the Jews or the Gypsies and so on. And, sometimes they can't, depending on the situation. But it's definitely one of the two aspects that make up a nation. So the Athenians are, you're saying, first and foremost, the people. They're first and foremost the blood. And the soil is almost a secondary consideration.
And it's actually very interesting because Athenians did not, in the most ancient period, Athenians did marry outside of especially aristocratic Athenians did marry outside. For example, we mentioned the famous poet Pindaros. He was technically a descendant of one of the legendary ancient kings of Athens, Agenius. He was an Agilade by descent, but he was a citizen of Thebes, because one of his great mother or great father married into some noble Theban house. But he did not consider himself an Athenian. So it's not exactly a blood element. At the beginning, the blood element is not really, it's a bit more fuzzy. By the time we get to the age of Pericles actually passes a law that make sure that only citizens only children born to a citizen and a daughter of a citizen can become a citizen of Athens. Everyone born for mixed marriage is not a citizen of Athens, which actually ends up causing great headache for Pericles, because his own children are not a product of a pure Athenian marriage, and he has to actually go to the assembly and ask for an exception from the law that he himself suggested to the assembly a few years before, after his pure-born sons were killed in action. But that's besides the point.
Well, it's fascinating that we're here stressing the tribal aspect of Athens, and it's an irony. Because I would say, and perhaps you'd agree, that Athens is at this point the most beautiful city in the world, bar none. And so therefore, if there's ever a place that you would actually want to defend the actual real estate, it's not like you could pick yourself up. There are the actual beautiful buildings and the columns and so on and so forth. That would be Athens. And in fact, just to introduce a topic that maybe you could comment on more, the two most famous city-states, and this is, like you said, a city, and there's a civilization around the city. They often have the surrounding farmland, so they could have that hybrid of city life plus the farming that would actually support them. Although Athens was pretty terrible at this. They had to import grain. But the two most famous are Athens and Sparta, which are very, very different. Sparta, you could imagine them moving on because, they're completely martial and it's all about the actual citizens. It's all about the blood flowing through them. Athens has the beautiful buildings. And these are the two most famous cities. Perhaps you could comment on this and tell us about other famous city-states and why they're significant to think about.
Well, we have Argos, which is the it's not exactly the successor state to Mycenae, to the primary city of the Mycenaean civilization and empire, but because the dwellers are not descended from the Mycenaeans. The dwellers are Doric Greeks who destroyed the Mycenaean civilizations and conquered the place. And they live, and their city is actually slightly removed from Mycenae. But the Argives, as the dwellers of Argos are called, are very proud. For a very long time, they were the most important Doric city in the Peloponnese, and therefore the most important city in Greece. And they have this, and to a degree, actually Homer, one of the names that he gives to all the Greeks is Argives, because they were led by the Argives. You have Corinth, which for a very long time was the primary harbor of Greece, because it sits right in the north of the Peloponnese on the isthmus, which is the land bridge between the Peloponnese and mainland Greece. It's also of Doric descent, even though they have a lot of Ionian blood going around. It's not one of those cities in which blood is the most important thing, but they are a very commercial hub. They're a great commercial hub. They're a great seagoing nation. And famously, Jason and the Argonauts set out from Corinth, and that's where they come back. And as a matter of fact, the Corinthians keep around the ship of the Argo, the ship of Jason's ship, and they, from time to time, they replace this rotten plank and this old rope. Hence the ancient riddle about Jason's ship. Is it still Jason's ship if all the planks and all the lanes were replaced?
Yes, and this show we promise philosophy and we deliver philosophy. So think about that when you're trying to fall asleep. Is it the same ship? What other city-states are worthy of mention?
We have Thebes, which is one of the remainders of Mycenaean civilization, but of course it changed a lot since the fall of Mycenaean civilization, just like Athens. It was greatly influenced by Doric institutions. You have Olympia, which originally was a Doric site, but then became a pan-Hellenic site, holy site, because again, all the other the Boeotians, which is what we call the tribe living, whose main city is Thebes, and the Ionians and Aeolians and all the other Greek tribes eventually came to embrace the Doric way of worshipping the gods, that the old and the new, and you have Dodona, which is again a Doric site in which people predict the future and the will of the gods and particularly of Zeus by watching the movement of the oak trees of the sacred oak grove. And you have, of course, Delphi, an interesting name because Delphoi means brothers. And of course, the Oracle of Delphi, again, a Doric institution, which means more related to Sparta, etc. But all the Greeks come to rely on it. And
so that's interesting because they were somewhere in this oracle, which I believe it to be a virgin lady of some fashion, right? Or at least theoretically virgin. She's, being consulted about the will of the gods. So in the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, which is this massive war, the greatest war ever, between the Greeks in Sparta and their allies, and Athens and their allies, and which culminates in a Spartan victory. So at the beginning of the war, the oracle is neutral on the subject of who's going to win the war.
Mhm.
But towards the end of the war, they say Sparta is going to win. And they
Yes.
do win.
And
So they were able to read the tea leaves.
yes, but actually, as a matter of fact, it was famous that the Oracle of Delphi tends to be on the side of the Spartans. Nobody is sure why. I suspect because again, it was a very Doric institution, but that's besides the point. You have, on the other hand, if you want to talk about an Ionian institution, which is more under the influence of Athens, you have the island of Delos, which is sacred which is like Delphi, it's sacred to Apollo, but it's also sacred to his twin sister Artemis, because that's the purported birthing place. And as a matter of fact, Delos is so sacred that nobody is allowed to die or be born there. No human being is allowed to die or be born on Delos. So whenever a woman enters into labor, or when an old man is about to die, they would put them on a boat and row as fast as they can away from the shore. So yes, and this is a sacred place to all the Ionians, relatives of the Athenians. And what?
So just to clarify to your audience, to simplify, Ionians are connected to Athens, and they're, let's just say, a race of people, of invaders who swept through Greece. And the Dorians are with Sparta.
Yes, and actually the Dorians are more of the newcomer invaders. The Ionians claim that they are autochthonic, which means native to Greece, and particularly to Attica, and that they are settling all across the eastern shore of the Aegean, on the western coast of Asia Minor, or as we know it now, Turkey, and henceforth
just to explain to our audience. So, Greece itself is partially an idea, partially a geographical location. So the Greek city-states in Turkey, in Asia Minor, are part of Hellas, let's say, culturally, philosophically, and so on and so forth.
Because they descend from Greek people who colonized this, and colonization is a big thing in a certain point in Greek history, up until the Roman conquest. As a matter of fact, in those colonies, it's not rare to have mixed colonies, in which people from various cities come together and they become citizens of the new city. But the idea is that the citizens of a colonial city, they're not citizens of the mother city, but the mother city, or the metropolis, as you may call it, have some responsibilities towards the daughter cities.
Interesting, and that's perhaps a conversation for another time.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking about what Aristotle says about when you had multiple colonists in the same place, they didn't necessarily work out for the peace and tranquility, and one side would expel the other or massacre them and so on.
But sometimes it worked. But sometimes it worked very well, and sometimes the colony actually sided with the rival of its mother city against its mother city. That's actually what was one of the things that triggered the Peloponnesian War, because because Corcyra, a Corinthian colony, wanted to side with the Athenians against Corinth.
Yes, but I think we're not going to stress the Peloponnesian War in this episode, rather the Persian invasions. And we had ready for you one clip for the movie trailer, The 300 Spartans. Tell us about our other clip, this other movie. Have you seen the movie 300, the famous movie?
The Zack Snyder one.
Yes.
Yeah, unlike what he would have you believed, Xerxes was not bald and clean-shaven.
Who is Xerxes?
Xerxes, the king of Persia, obviously, son of Darius, and who attacked Greece at 4 AD, I believe. And as a matter of fact, if no king of Persia could be caught dead, clean-shaven, that will be a great shame in the Near East.
I'm beginning to see a theme because we mentioned this last episode. I did manage to find part of it. Let me see if I could bring up the clip that I have in mind. And the clip that's described in the video that I'm going to try to see if I could play for our audience, that in fact is more or less what happened.
Yes, I can confirm it as a matter of fact, because that's one of the few things that actually are visually accurate. Not in terms, well, he doesn't. Well, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Okay, I believe we have it for you now. Let me see if I could find it. And so this is the Spartans, indisputably at this point the most martial fighting men of Greece, are being approached by a Persian envoy who wants them to pay homage to the Persians and surrender their freedom
by giving him earth and water.
And let's see if we could play it now.
A token of Sparta's submission to the will of Xerxes. Submission. Well, that's a bit of a problem. Madman. You're a madman. Earth and water. Well, you'll find plenty of both down there. No man, Persian or Greek, no man threatens a messenger. You bring the crowns and heads of conquered kings to my city steps. You insult my queen. You threaten my people with slavery and death. Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. Perhaps you should have done the same. This is blasphemy. This is madness! Madness. This is Sparta!
Well, actually, the most accurate thing they just say, "Oh, you want earth and water? Here," and they push them down the well. So no, a good Spartan would not waste so many words, because one of the things the Spartans are very proud of is their laconic way of thinking. And laconic, of course, means somebody who comes from Laconia or from Lacedaemon, which is what they call their land, and of course themselves. And the thing is, why they cultivate this type of speech and this type of witticism, the ability to say things in very short words, because they are martial people. They need to convey orders in the heat of battle very quickly. So
they know how to get to the point.
Exactly. And since we got to the point, let's
see you again on the other side.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, this is Joseph again with Isaac, and we're finishing. Are we in episode 6?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'm glad we made it this far. I had no doubts. This is the Iron Rod podcast.
We have run the race, as you can see. And this is not the end of the race, obviously.
Yes, and we haven't even talked about the Battle of the Marathon, a different time, where the term marathon and where races became popular. We just heard the clip of the film 300, and we talked about Sparta. Any final words on Sparta and their way of life?
The Spartan way of life was very human, but not very humane. It was based on the subjugation of the Helots. The Helots were the original inhabitants of Lacedaemon, which is the land in the south of the Peloponnese where Sparta is situated, and reducing them to slavery essentially. And the basic idea was, and not that the Spartan citizen had a much easier life. The Spartan citizen was born, lived, and died as part of a constant agon with his peers to show that he is the best soldier possible, and to become the best soldier. And by the way, many Spartan children did not survive the first few hours of the childbirth because the weak children were exposed. It was not it was not exactly a unique thing to Sparta, but in Sparta it was much, much more pronounced, because it's not that a child that was sickly was exposed or a female child was exposed. Actually, Spartans tend to expose less females because inheritance in Sparta was done through the female line. And that's why women were actually enjoyed a greater status in Sparta than in Athens. But if a male child was not strong enough, did not seem strong enough to grow up for a soldier, or a female child did not seem to be strong enough to be able to grow up and bear children, and bear strong children, she would die. She would be left to die. And when they grew up, the females were under very similar regime, or Agora, in terms of which is a word for education or training, to the male children, because the Spartans believed that strong mothers make strong sons. I don't know how accurate it is medically, but
allow me to interject and say that this is actually a controversy between Plato and Aristotle as to whether the women in Sparta were hedonistically enthralled in their luxury and luxurious lifestyle or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so Aristotle takes the view that they were completely decadent and in fact undermining society as a result, and Plato takes a view consistent to what you just described.
Well, Plato, remember that Aristotle saw Sparta only after it was degraded after the 30 Years' War, after basically the Spartan way of life started decaying. Plato still was of the generation that saw the Spartans marching on Athens in their full glory and might. And
to remind the audience, Plato lived during the war we just mentioned, the Peloponnesian War.
Yes, he was a young man back then. He was one of the youngest disciples of Socrates. But yes, and he actually saw Spartans living as they should live, according to their own constitution. And
it can be added to this, by the way, that Plato's Republic, which it has been averred would succeed in winning wars and in feeding the population, because it would be orderly and it would be prudent and so on, accomplishes the two things that Plato feels that Athens lacked in the beginning of his life. Athens loses the war, and Plato is living in a besieged city of Athens that is not eating enough.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why the Peloponnesian War has a significant effect on Plato's thinking and then on his political philosophy.
But he has a lot of, some critique for Sparta as well. He can see that Sparta is decaying, the Spartan order is decaying, and it's not based on anything logical, because the Helots are not kept as serfs because they are worse than the Spartans. It's just that the Spartans seems to think that they are more excellent than the Helots. Therefore, they have a justification to subjugate the Helots. In his city, your father can be a bronze man, or in other words, somebody who is an artisan or a serf, but you might be born with the golden element in your soul, which means that makes you one of the philosopher kings. So he is trying to find out, how do you create an agon of true excellence, the excellence of the soul, the excellence of the mind? And it's a very difficult thing to do. So he actually doesn't have a good answer for it. He just says that if we could determine the excellence of the soul, then this is the best excellence. This is what should be determine who should rule society. But back to Sparta, nothing as a Spartan, nothing. When you grow up, nothing is guaranteed to you, even if you are a Spartiate, even if you are a proper citizen of Sparta, because your wealth is given to you and is yours, but you can't use it to anything, because you must eat together with all the other people, and you are under constant scrutiny for not being decadent and martial-like. And your wife, that you, by the way, you can go to her only only by sneaking out of the barracks and back into your house without
From the age of 20 to 30.
From the age of 20 to 30, because they believe that this is the best way to do things, to hone the skill of sneaking out, which is very good for a soldier.
Although it may have had also, this may or may not have been the intention, it may have had the tangential desire to keep the passion alive by making it so mischievous. And thus bear more children.
Of course.
And you were incentivized to bear more children, because I believe if you had 4, you were now exempt from military duty.
Yes, you were considered to be a father of the state, and you're not exactly exempt from military duty, but you were not under such a strict.
Yes.
You did not sleep in the barracks anymore. You might say you belong now to the officer class, and
So I think, just to edify the audience, Spartan boys, I think from the age of 7, are all living together in the barracks.
Yes.
And they're all, it's kind of a, dog-eat-dog world over there. They're not given enough food, so they have to steal food. And, sometimes children die, like in Xenophon, somebody steals and kills one of the kids or whatever. So it's very brutal. And
you are flogged on a semi-regular basis.
It doesn't just create strong soldiers, it also creates cunning soldiers, because they're not just mindless killing machines. They are also smart at killing.
And very deceitful people. They are taught to steal, lie, cheat, all the good positive lessons that you want a 7-year-old boy to learn.
Well, a 7-year-old boy who's going to turn out to be a Spartan soldier who's able to firstly rule his gigantic empire, and there's tremendous amount of helots. Some estimates I've seen 1 million slaves in a country that is fielding perhaps 10,000 infantry in the
Absolutely.
field.
And remember that all Spartan teenagers have to go through the Crypteia, which means for a while they are part of Sparta's secret police, who go every year. They officially declare war, scare quotes, on the helots, and just kill them indiscriminately.
One day a year.
Yes.
Oh, you're right.
A day and a night.
I actually, I'm not so shocked by this to think it didn't happen, though this has, going back to ancient times, been a subject of controversy if this was real or not.
Yes,
but the secret police did manage to keep the slaves in check, and Spartan society didn't change for hundreds of years.
Yes.
Which, to change track slightly, we do see an interesting theme about how Athenian society changes very often. Read Plato's Republic. Each form of government brings another form. Spartan society is very consistent. And this brings us back to what I mentioned before, that every important political lesson that exists was really learned by the ancient Greeks. There's very little that's totally original today.
And that is because the Athenians see the Athenians and the Spartans see the concept of political agon in a very different way. The Spartans see the agon as between individuals within the system. The system must never change, but you must show that you are the most excellent participant in that system. And if you are not, you'll be dead by the age of 20. And if you are not dead, and if by any chance you manage to marry, your wife is at full liberty to take stronger and more capable lovers who would give the state stronger and more capable children than you are, weakling.
This is Sparta, as opposed to Athens.
In Athens, the idea is the agon is between individuals, but it's between individuals as bearers of ideas. And the best ideas, which are of course are carried by the best people, presumably, should win and should change. And the system should change because the system is merely a framework for the most excellent ideas carried in practice by the most excellent people. And that's why, by the way, all the critics of democracy portray demagogues or democratic politicians as very, very ignoble people and not very excellent. For example, Aristophanes, who was an aristocrat, who makes fun of various Athenian politicians, especially in his comedy Cavalrymen. And
Aristophanes is one of 3 playwrights that we have the full play surviving till today.
Yes, we have. He's the comedic one from the classical age of Athens. But we also have the tragic trio. We have Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus, of course, invented the concept of costumes and multiple voices in a tragedy, more than 2. Sophocles added the third actor, which was revolutionary, and he also added the idea of to put on some sort of what you may call it, stage props. Euripides was just a good tragic writer. And
tell us about your book recommendation for today.
My book recommendation is a book by Marie Renaud called The Last of the Wine. It's about a young Athenian aristocrat called Alexis, who lives through the 30 Years' War. And basically it described the 30 Years' War as a struggle or an agon between the various city-states. And it's also, his entire life is part of an agon, because first he must prove to his father that he's worthy to be his son, because his father originally want him to be exposed because he's very weak when he's born. And his entire life is him proving that he's good enough to live. And at a certain point he goes to the Isthmian Games, which are the Pan-Hellenic Games, and compete as a track racer. And he actually wins, and various other interesting things. And it's also about the competition between the competing systems of Sparta and Athens and other city-states in Greece. And it's a very interesting book, it's of course the first part of a series in Marie Renaud's exploration of the ancient world. She has a book about Alexander the Great called The Persian Boy. She has a book about various and sundry things.
Yeah, just to clarify, you said before the 30 Years' War, you're talking about the Peloponnesian War.
The Peloponnesian War, yes.
Yeah. Well, it lasts around 30 years. I mean,
yes, exactly.
Less,
I'm sorry, of course, not the 17th century year within the Holy Roman Empire.
Yes. But speaking of which, I think we are very good at getting everything exactly right, and I do listen to all the podcasts afterwards, and we update the show notes with corrections. But if you want to feel like a smart aleck, feel free to write into us with anything you feel like we got wrong, and we will ascertain and scrutinize. We've mentioned the game several times, so I wonder if you'll permit me to add this quote by John Burnet. He's an early 20th century writer, and he's talking about Pythagoras, and I've read this various times, several times, many times in fact, and I've always been kind of astounded by this short piece that describes the philosophy, and maybe this will give you some food for thought as well. So let me read this. So, in describing Pythagoras, he says, "We are strangers in this world, and the body is the tomb of the soul. And yet we must not escape. We must not seek to escape by self-murder, suicide, for we are the chattels of God, who is our herdsman, and without his command we have no right to make our escape. In this life there are 3 kinds of men, just as there are 3 sorts of people who come to the Olympic Games. The lowest class is made up of those who come to buy and sell. The next above them are those who compete. Best of all, however, are those who simply who comes simply to look on. The greatest purification of all is therefore disinterested science, and is the man who devotes himself to that, the true philosopher, who has most effectually released himself from the wheel of birth. Now, I want to add a couple of thoughts to this, and one is we're talking about the men competing in the Olympics or in other things, and from this point of view, in fact, that is not the highest level you can get. That is, I mean, that's better than people who come to the Olympics to buy and sell. Those are, the merchant class. Aristotle would have nothing but bad words to say about them.
Oh, yes.
But even these people who are competing, and they're competing for beauty and brawn, and they're attractive and so on, they're still not as great as those who simply come to look on. The people who are viewing the great, in other words, the philosophers, and the Greeks are the first in this, in the Western world for sure, who are saying, because we Greeks have so much extra, food production, but we're not like the Egyptians or the Babylonians who do other things with our surplus production. We produce enough people like Socrates who could make thinking, being, ultimately philosophizing, as a full-time job, and thus create arguably the greatest philosophical thinking in the history of the world.
Yes, and this is an interesting thing because it's not accurate that Socrates, for example, was a stonemason. As a matter of fact, there are a few staircases in Athens which people claim were built by Socrates. But, of course, he had a farm, like most Athenian citizens, to which he actually dedicated much of his time. As a matter of fact, in the opening of a certain dialogue, I forgot which, I know, hit me. And they mention two of his interlocutors mentioned that here's Socrates coming back from his farm, but it's true that as a citizen of certain means, what happened to the surplus of his farm? What did it enable him to do? He didn't give it all to the guards or to the rulers of the city, as would have happened in Mesopotamia. He didn't go to the taxman or to the king or to the temple, which very often were one and the same. But it went to him so he can have some extra time to philosophize. Now the quote that my co-host graciously quoted, this sums up Pythagoras' idea, but Pythagoras is not typical Greek. As a matter of fact, the Greeks common citizen eventually where the Pythagorean schools were established by the help of local tyrants, the citizens of those cities eventually rise up against those tyrants, are so offended by those schools which they associate with tyranny that they murder the Pythagorean philosophers and burn those schools to a crisp. And so by the time of Plato, the Pythagorean school exists as a cryptic school, some sort of something that you accuse your enemies of belonging to if they are not careful. But Socrates invents a new thing. He invents the idea that truth is also objective, not just the truth of merit, but truth of justice. The truth as a truth is something objective that we can observe and find, and that we must observe and find because we don't know it intuitively. And this is the great contribution of Socrates. And an agon which exists not between two men trying to prove to each other that one of them is the best, or that a third party is the best, but an agon within one person's mind, who is helped by a friend, by an interlocutor, by a debater. Yes, who debates and strives with him, but not as a rival, but as a friend who tries to help him judge among all the ideas that they both have in their heads, which one is the best and which one is the most truthful.
Yes, although that is a great theory. In practice, if in some of the dialogues, some of the people have to be restrained from inflicting bodily harm against him.
Oh, absolutely. And eventually, of course, they inflict the worst bodily harm on Socrates.
Yes. Socrates is put on public trial, and he's forced to commit suicide at the end of his life. And that is, in part, why Plato is not thrilled with the whole idea of democracy. Because the Athenian democracy voted to have him executed. Just like they voted to, for example, enslave certain populations that they conquered.
Yes, exactly. But that actually leads me to believe that Socrates is a good, loyal Athenian who is loyal to the Athenian constitution of traditional democracy, which is not exactly what.
So let me make a counterpoint, and I actually agree with you in your vision of Socrates. But you have Plutarch, I think, putting in Socrates' mouth. But he's living 400 or 500 years later. He says that Socrates had said that I'm a citizen of the world. And for me, that's not something that a good, loyal citizen says. Now, Diogenes is famously associated with that line, and he was such a weirdo that I have no doubt he would say something like that.
Because Diogenes believes that states are artificial and all artificial things are bad. Socrates is far from believing that. First of all, he doesn't think that states are necessarily artificial, and he doesn't believe that all artificial things are necessarily bad. And the thing is, Socrates, we said, was forced to poison himself. No, he was put in a prison which was so pathetic in its ability to hold prisoners that he could easily have escaped. As a matter of fact, both Plato and Xenophon, when they are describing the last few hours in the life of Socrates, press that some of the best and greatest citizens of Athens were more than willing to pay off the gods and make him escape. And he takes, and the cup of poison, the hemlock, is not being thrust down his throat by the god. The god gives it to him at the end of a very agreeable meal, and he takes it and he drinks it himself. And his last words were, "We owe a rooster to Aesculapius, the god of medicine. Please, Harry, do not tarry in paying it." Now, of course, he refers jokingly to the poison as medicine. He say, "Oh, I just took my medicine, so you'll have to sacrifice to the god of medicine."
Well, I think you're making a additional point, a different point, that he was very stoic about this.
He was very stoic and he was very loyal. And his point is,
and he believes also that his death will either result in him going to some sort of paradise, which is good, or him having an eternal sleep, which is also good.
Yeah.
So whatever, come what may, he'll be well off,
and much better off than living the rest of his life in exile, which is such a terrible fate that he can't even contemplate it.
Okay, so in this respect, he's like the other person, and his is probably the second most famous trial of all time. The most famous trial being, Jesus, and in that sense, that he's accepting his death upon himself, to the point that he in fact is inflicted upon himself.
But
he's accepting it in the same way that he is.
But he accepts it for his own sake, for his own happiness, not for the sake of anybody else's.
And that comes.
He's
and
not
thereby
trying.
comes the difference between the pagan and the Christian.
He's not trying to be a martyr. He's not trying to make the world a better place by taking the poison. He's trying. He's choosing the best options he has before him.
And he's obeying the law of the state, which you mentioned that he's saying, well, he has a ability to escape, and it was almost thought perhaps that the court that adjudicated his death, in fact, wanted it to escape. They wanted it to be gone with the whole issue.
It was a common procedure. They sentence somebody to death, but they give him him a stay of 1 day to 1 week, wink wink nod nod, to get out and never come back again. And after a few years, they might vote again on the issue and allow him to come back and rescind the sentence. But he says, no. The laws of Athens says that if the assembly votes on if the council and the assembly vote on something and judge someone, all the citizens have the authority and the duty to enforce what was voted upon. And I'm a citizen of Athens. As such, my duty is to fulfill the duty that was given to me by the council, which is to poison myself. So I would rather die a good citizen of Athens, obeying the law of Athens, than anything else.
Fascinating. And just to make a final point, in terms of seeing things in ancient times that we see today, you'll often see today when they're trying a murder or somebody, that they're going to bring the family members and they cry and they bewail and the media is sympathetic.
That's very common in ancient Greece and Greek trials.
Socrates makes the point that he didn't find it edifying to bring his the crying wife and children to garner sympathy towards him. So
as a matter of fact, when his wife and children come to greet him in his cell before he kills himself, and and of course cry, he comfort his wife, which by the way they never treated him very nicely, perhaps with good reason. He was not a very good provider or a very good husband by all accounts.
Or good looking.
Or good looking. I'm sorry about that. And
No, he said about himself, that he's the ugliest man in Athens.
He joked about it a lot, and to his sons he says that it's not becoming young citizens like them to cry like women. So those were his words. So he essentially believes in the Athenian ethos to the end, and he believes, and basically he tells his friends that he doesn't want his children, his sons, to cry because it's not proper for young citizens to cry because the edicts of the polis, which was properly voted upon by all citizens and by all legitimate bodies, was carried out. This is not a cause of grief. It's of course sad that the law was misapplied and that the assembly was wrong in its judgment, but the fact that he's fulfilling that edict is not a cause for grief.
Yes, and herein we see a violation of the freedom that we were discussing present in ancient Greece, which, in our future episode, which civilization are we going to be speaking about in terms of the origin of freedom?
Well, I would like to speak about the Germanics, because the Germanics are a thing red in tooth and claw, but they have something that the Greeks don't have, which is free association, the idea of a state that is created that is not just run from the bottom up by the citizens, but actually have to carry the favor of the citizens to being created continuously. And that's something we will talk about next week. And this is all for this week.
We shall see you again next week.
And for now, remember,
More or Tehran.
More or Tehran indeed.